And Simon, we're going to dive in now and do some freaking reviews of that one movie. It's the guy with the pointy ears and the other one who doesn't have ears. It's called Deadpool and Wolverine.
Only 9 people, but my entire world is right here in this picture. And I have no idea how to save it alone, but you know how to save them.
So usually the way we do this is if I yammer on way too much at the beginning, usually Simon takes up the cause to give a bit of a run through on the next thing so that, people get some break from my monotony. But Simon's like, it's comic book shit. You do this, Dan. I'm like, sure. Positivity. So I'm going to give you the log line and then Simon
That's exactly...
Paraphrasing. Okay, so Simon, here is the log line for the movie Deadpool and Wolverine, aka Deadpool 3. Wolverine is recovering from his injuries when he crosses paths with the loudmouth Deadpool. They team up to fight a common enemy. Now, I don't know if that logline's really true. I mean, Wolverine's pretty dead.
It's not true at all.
When the movie begins. And they don't really team up to defeat a common enemy. Basically, they encounter a common enemy and then just kind of have to deal with it together. So I don't think there's anything true about that logline in the slightest. But look, here's the deal with the movie. We've seen Deadpool. He's a assassin who's got a cheeky and politely juvenile sense of humor.
The Merc with the mouth. That's what they call him.
Merc with the mouth. Merc being a mercenary.
Mm.
So you got him. You got Wolverine, who we've seen in, I believe, doing the rough math, 45 different movies at this point.
At least
all played by Hugh Jackman in each of these movies. The very last one we saw him in was a film called Logan, which was one of the better X-Men installments of the very patchy franchise. But Logan, the end of the movie, has him sacrificing himself and dying in the closing minutes of that film, which is exactly where Deadpool and Wolverine picks up, because Deadpool, he's got some problem with the time cops that were introduced in that Loki TV show. I forget the name. They're like the Time VS. It doesn't matter.
They're the minions of the TVA. The TVA being the Time something, run by Matthew McFadden from Succession, as we find out in this film. So I do go on because I'm keen to see how you put this plot, which isn't really important to what goes on in the film, but it's kind of there. So you better wrap it up.
Yeah, look. Yeah, so look, the film opens with him. He's got trouble with the time cops. He's like, I'm going to need Wolverine to help me out here. A lot of this is in media res, so we've kind of already seen the transaction here, which is that he starts jumping through various time across the multiverse to find different Wolverines, and the one that we see him at the beginning is the Logan one, so he decides he wants to resurrect Logan from the dead. Okay, Logan being Wolverine's real name. So he's there, and basically you see an extended fight sequence in the first 15 minutes of the movie, which is the time cops attacking Deadpool and the rotting corpse of Logan from the heartfelt death that he encountered just minutes beforehand when this movie opens.
Providing one of the biggest laughs in the film, I've got to say. That scene where he's sitting next to the corpse is pretty hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, mostly a adamantium skeleton by this point, but still a corpse nonetheless. So that's kind of how the film opens, and at some point he ends up traveling through various multiverses, ends up settling on a Wolverine, which is apparently the worst Wolverine of them all, and only the worst because he allowed all the other X-Men to be brutally murdered. I don't know that we saw that anywhere, or that it's, pre-built into this character's knowledge. So if that's from a world somewhere that I just haven't seen the episode of What If, apologies. So teams up with this Wolverine, as played by Hugh Jackman again. And through, almost, actually slightly over 2 hours, it's lots of sarcastic, juvenile jokes. It's lots of silliness of multiverse jokes. There's pointing fingers at Marvel and how it doesn't really work anymore and how no one likes it. There's an extended conversation about how people... The whole multiverse idea that Marvel's introduced hasn't really worked, and so they're going to back away from that, which I thought was very funny. But what we're seeing here is largely a metatextual analysis of the Marvel movies to date, and that's movies that exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is the main Marvel films, as well as the Marvel films that were produced by Fox, which is now being bought by Disney, which owns the MCU. So this is their way of looking back at the Fox movies with a bit of reverence while also making fun of them and smushing these worlds together.
Now we should have discussed this before the podcast, just how spoilery we're going to get, because some of the big joys for me in this movie, and they were plentiful. I really enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine. Some of the biggest joys in this were the appearance of some of those, shall we say, minor characters or missed franchise opportunity characters.
Here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. If people are interested in this movie, they're very much going to see this on the opening weekend.
All right.
Okay. They've possibly already seen it. There were Wednesday night previews. Lots of people have seen this film. If you're interested in seeing it, you're probably going to see it. We're just going to spoil it. We're going to talk about it. This is a conversation about the movie for folks that have seen it at this point in.
All right. Okay. Then let's just really weigh into what I loved about this film.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Wait a sec. Sorry.
Yes.
Top level. Did we like this movie?
Okay. Yes, we did. I wasn't particularly engaged by the story, the multiverse twirling around on itself, and I enjoyed the fact that through the Deadpool sarcasm and through his wit, we were able to take down some of the what are now very tropish, very cliched MCU or comic book movies in general tropes that have afflicted the genre. So in that regard, I had a good laugh. Also had a good laugh at a lot of the meta humor in there, the jabs at Fox, the jabs at Disney, the jabs at Ben Affleck at one point, which I thought was hilarious. It had some very funny moments in it that you've got to listen carefully for to really get the full appreciation out of it. Did it run too long? Yes. Did it indulge Hugh Jackman a couple of very suddenly serious scenes that feel like the actor wanting to throw his weight around and maybe have a bit more meat on the dramatic sandwich that he otherwise wouldn't have had in a movie like this? Yes, it feels a bit like that. But they're minor quips. I actually had a really good time, much more than I thought I was going to with this.
Yeah, look, I really quite enjoyed this as well in a way that I hadn't expected. My relationship with the Deadpool movies is I saw the first half of the first one, and it wasn't an unfortunate situation that stopped me from seeing the second half. It's because I walked out of the cinema. I really just did not like it. I sat there. Well, I was telling a friend of mine about this morning because he kind of had almost the same reaction with this film, which he didn't care for. Okay. Right. And he usually eats this sort of thing up a bit more than I do. But I was sitting there and I thought this was like 8 years ago, the first Deadpool film came out. I remember sitting there thinking, look, I'm in my mid-30s. What am I doing sitting here wasting my time with this juvenile nonsense? Okay. I'm walking out. And I got up and left. I had better things to do that night. It turns out I didn't have better things to do that night, and for the rest of the night, I'm like, should I have walked out of it? But I don't regret it. Never saw the second film.
You never went back to it? You never finished watching it? Wow, okay.
No, not at all. So, haven't seen most of that film, but I get the idea. Like, I know who the character is. Like, I get the joke. So, I knew enough where I could sit in this film and not be confused at all by any of it. Okay, but also I've seen all the other Marvel movies, and that's the trick with this one, in that this film is so referential to Marvel films from the classic MCU through to all the Fox movies, but also it deep dives into some of the disappointments and expectations of the Fox movies. For example, there was talk of a spin-off from the X-Men movies of a character who wasn't even in the X-Men movies, a character called Gambit, who, if people know the X-Men comics or the cartoon series, he's the fellow with the playing cards that he charges up with energy and throws them at people and they'll go boom. He was going to be the star of a movie. And this has been talk since, like, almost the early 2000s when that first X-Men movie did pretty well. There was talk about bringing Gambit in because he's got a cool coat and he makes things go boom. Like, he's a fun character. Anyway, for like the last, I don't know, I'm going to say like 10 plus years, there's been talk of Channing Tatum's been signed to be Gambit. Okay.
He was that close. It was very close to production at one stage, and it was going to be Channing Tatum's big role of the superhero dice, as it were, other than, he did the G.I. Joe films, but they never did anything for him. So, yeah, Gambit was going to be, and to see him actually step up and play it.
Well, this is it. In the movie, he's there.
Yeah, it's a missed opportunity otherwise, because he was very funny, and his accent in this, I don't know if Gambit has an accent in the comics. People know by now that I'm not really guy, but he was very funny in this.
It's like Louisiana drawl sort of a thing.
Yeah. It's and not to mention, as part of the crew that Gambit is part of, you've got the very beautiful Jennifer Garner returning as Elektra, and you've got a somehow kind of as young as he was 20 years ago, Wesley Snipes back as Blade. So the appearance of these characters midway through the film, not to mention the jaw drop moment when Chris Evans turns up, but in the guise of a character.
Captain America star Chris Evans, but not here as Captain America.
Yes, but this movie references another appearance in the MCU that I think Simon, he and most of his fans may have forgotten.
It's a spoiler moment. You can talk about who the character is. It's fine.
I'm sort of reluctant to.
The Marvel time cops aren't going to come after you. It's okay.
Okay. Well, one of Chris Evans' very earliest roles was as, what's his name? Johnny Storm in the first Fantastic Four movie. And just when you think he's going to reveal himself to be Captain America, he in fact turns out to be a version of Johnny Storm. And his demise, there we go. We're really spoiling it up for Storm here, no pun intended. But his demise is very, very funny in this film.
Yeah, and made even better in the closing sequence. Like end credits, there are 2 end credit sequences, and the final one is absolutely paying off the death of Johnny Storm in a really fantastic way.
And the other one makes you realize exactly how old the X-Men franchise is, because they have, I guess, sort of DVD outtakes or DVD making of moments playing alongside the credits.
All to the tune of Time of Your Life, just like the Seinfeld finale.
Exactly right. And it was and Hugh Jackman just looks so young. He's been doing this for a long time. A reference that is made throughout the film when Ryan Reynolds is constantly reminding him he's going to be doing this character till you're 90.
Okay, so look, we've already sort of talked about the movie, but we haven't really talked about, this from like a critical, does it work sort of a perspective.
Yeah, sure.
So look, the criticism I have with a lot of the Marvel films, particularly... Look, I think there's lots of criticism you can level at, like the last 5 or 6 of them. So ever since Endgame, like I don't think the Marvel Universe has really strictly worked all that well outside of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. But one of the criticisms is that there's so much of a lean into the fact that you need these cameos and known characters, and it's only kind of fan service rather than actually servicing the actual movie itself. This movie is all cameos and all fan service. Anyone who says otherwise is lying to you, frankly.
Oh, absolutely it is. And I've read some reviews that absolutely acknowledge that. The Variety, I don't know who wrote the review for Variety, but he said it is the most fan service movie by some measure that's ever been made. And setting this movie in the void, which is sort of like the garbage dump for superheroes traveling through multi-universes.
Particularly Fox superheroes.
Yeah, exactly right. I thought it was a very clever way of just sort of discarding so many limp and terrible versions of superheroes that Marvel have offered up over the years. I digress. Do go on.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, I think that usually the criticism of these films relying just purely on their cameos is pretty well justified. But for this film specifically, I think that so much of it is... It's not really a love letter to the Marvel Fox movies, but it's kind of like a Dear John letter. It's kind of like them breaking up with the Fox movies. And the only way to do that properly is to be able to poke some fun at them, to be able to poke some fun at itself, being the MCU. And broadly, I kind of feel as though this is the equivalent of a superhero roast more than it is like an actual piece of cinematic property. And for all that, it's hugely entertaining. Is it a movie I will ever bother watching again? Absolutely not. I can't see any scenario where I would ever watch this for more than a few minutes. And I might fast forward to the scene where Deadpool fights 100 other Deadpools from various other universes.
Very funny.
Yeah. And like, it was funny, but also that scene doesn't really pay off at all. Okay, like it's fun watching like him go through and, well, him and Wolverine mowing down like 100 opponents. But like, it doesn't really play around enough with the idea of different variants on Deadpool, or like, there's no joke to it. Like, why does it need to be like Deadpool's? Like, they don't justify that.
That's an interesting point. I did feel there were moments in this film, and at 2 hours and 8 minutes or whatever it is, that could have been trimmed. The fight in the car, in the Honda or the Kia, whatever the car was that got a big laugh when the name was mentioned. That was another scene that was, literally for a fan service moment, just so you could stick it. And you start to realize that because they're both regenerative superheroes, a big fight scene like that is just a massive outpouring of anger. It's not going to have any impact on the characters. and blood, and it's a total indulgence for everyone involved, which is not to say the film should be confused for anything other than a total indulgence for everyone involved, including the fans and the audience. It absolutely is that. Let me put it to you, was there enough done with the Wolverine character to warrant resurrecting him for this franchise entry? Because for me, let me say Wolverine is, I can, if I had to rattle off my 5 favorite superhero movies ever, and this is probably opening a can of worms, I would say Christopher Reeve Superman. I would say probably the first X-Men, the Bryan Singer X-Men, all the way back, that introduced Wolverine, throw in Dick Tracy. I would also include Logan. I think that was Hugh Jackman's Hamlet. Some of the scenes in that were really powerful, and he really got to what the Wolverine character was, psychologically and metaphysically and all those sort of things in a way that few superhero films ever tackle or ever try to tackle. And probably the first Captain America film, the Joe Johnston film, but they're my favorite superhero films. I don't know if resurrecting Wolverine for this did enough to warrant the character being part of it. What are your thoughts?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. Okay, the only reason he's back is because he's hugely popular.
Yeah. It got close, and it plays on Hugh's and Ryan's real life riffing with each other and mateship. And there's a very funny quote in it where he says, "Don't want to take your shirt off, you let yourself go after the divorce," which Ryan says to Hugh Jackman's character, which was the sort of meta nod that I got a big laugh out of, but I think skimmed over the heads of a lot of the audience. But I'm glad he came back, and I'm glad he had some lighter moments, but there's still darkness in there that I think went untapped, wasn't exploited. Maybe thankfully it wasn't exploited in this film.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they did enough to justify it, but whatever. Yeah. But it was still hugely enjoyable. And as I said, I think this isn't really a movie. Like, most of these things aren't really movies. Like, this is just purely a very fun 2-hour trip to the movies, which it's a good way to say goodbye to all those Fox properties, but also I think a really good way for Marvel to kind of establish a bit of a sorbet for the Marvel films. They kind of need something to relax the palate a little bit so they can kind of reorientate and move forward. And I got the feeling very much from this, like they're joking about how the multiverse hasn't worked and a whole bunch of other aspects like that. That's kind of what this is. It's them saying, hey, look, there's a bunch of shit things. Here we are acknowledging that. Let's just put it aside, move on. And I think that, this worked out very well for it.
First of all, a huge shout out to Emma Corrin as, was it Rebecca? Who was the villain in it? I can't remember her name.
Like Lady Charles Xavier.
Yeah, the sister of Lady Charles. She was terrific, and then she had a great villain. Had a couple of really good scenes with Hugh Jackman as well. Can I just ask you, because we had 2 very different viewing experiences of this. You went to the Tuesday night preview, which was full of influencers, and it was the big sort of Sydney premiere of the film. And did it win over that crowd? Because I saw it last night at the 7:30 preview screening at Chatswood on a much smaller screen. It was still a good screen, but with maybe a 2/3 full cinema of absolutely passionate fans, and they really reacted well to it. Did it win over did it win over the influencer crowd, the PR crowd?
Yeah, so look, very much the crowd was a PR crowd, but the 2 people I was sitting on each side of, like, both of them were really big Marvel fanboys. You could tell from their disinterested girlfriends who were right next to them. So maybe that was kind of offsetting it.
They had girlfriends?
They were actually both very handsome men, but they're also both really into it and were reacting to, like, every character reveal and all that sort of business. Like, they were totally into it. And, like, I'll admit, like, their enthusiasm for it was maybe a bit infectious. And so I kind of, maybe got carried along a little bit with that. But broadly, from the 2 guys next to me, I couldn't really hear much else happening in the cinema. So I'm going to assume that it was well received.
And it is going to maintain the momentum. As we record this, news is coming out that Inside Out 2 is the biggest animated film ever, and the box office is kicking along with things like Twisters, and after a soft summer start, the American summer box office is kind of finding its legs and doing okay. We're all assuming this will be the huge hit that everyone needs it to be. Are we going to...
So dollar figures for it, Simon, is they're expecting 170 million domestic in the US and 360 million globally. And if it does those figures, like we're looking at, I think it's actually the biggest R-rated movie release of all time.
Sure. Bigger than Passion of the Christ. Not as funny, but bigger.
What was that, US R-rated?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. Oh, well, look, I'm not too sure. I'd have to get out the dollar figures and see.
Yeah, it was funnier, though. Okay.
So which one's funnier, the Jesus movie or this one?
Because Jesus movie.
Deadpool does refer to himself in the movie as Marvel's Jesus.
And we've come full circle. You see the way we handle these dual reviews? Sometimes they're exactly what the podcast needs. I thought that went very well.
Yeah, look, would I recommend this to people is probably the big question, and I would recommend it to the Marvel fans and those that like the sort of inside jokes surrounding Marvel. But if you are, a bit of a looky-loo, maybe just don't really bother with this one. I'm not sure this is really for you.
Isn't the outfit that Logan wears in this, and I know I'm going to get emails about this, I'm sorry, I'm not all over the costume mythology and the costume lore, but it's very similar to the one worn in the Watchmen film by the lead guy in that. Is that sort of a play on something?
Look, I barely remember the Watchmen movie. I mean, Zack Snyder, come on, Simon. The grown-ups are talking here. But the yellow costume you're seeing here is This is the classic Wolverine costume worn by Logan in the Chris Claremont comics from years gone by, which I think was also largely adapted into the animated show, which people would be pretty familiar with.
There were certainly moments in the screening that I went to last night where a couple of the fans in the background sort of went, "Oh wow!" So, which I didn't get what they were talking about. So there is multiple layers of fun to be had in this film, depending on your love of the fandom and love of the lore to do with these characters. So I once again, no, I don't recommend it to everybody. A, because if you don't get all the inside meta jokes, then B, you're just going to put up with a whole lot of blood and guts and swearing for 2 and a bit hours. But if you're kind of in on the joke and have had to sit through these superheroes film for the last 30 years like I have, then yeah, it's a good time.
The chart that you probably want, like the scale to work at is, and to whether or not you enjoy the movie or how much you'll enjoy it, the later you've got in life without ever touching a woman, you're going to enjoy this movie more. Put that on the movie poster, people.
Exactly. There's your poster quote, Fox. Disney. Yeah, all right. That's good. Our first double review. Well, one of our rare double reviews. So well done, Dan Barrett. What's next in the podcast?
Simon, at this point, we move on to a little segment we call The Intermission.